noticed that you had the unique challenge with this film of kind of making a war film before the kind of major thrust of the actual war kind of kicks off. So I was interested in just hearing your thoughts about where you kind of found the thematic thread for this first chapter to kind of pull you through the film.
Well, for us, there was, in the splitting of this book, there were kind of two really distinct stories that we found. The first one is a story about Katniss sort of really discovering her relevance to the other people, because she didn't really understand that she meant anything to anybody else, right? And also finally taking on the responsibility as the symbol of the revolution and joining the revolution. One of the big thematic ideas in this one is the kind of the war of the airways and manipulating imagery and creating propaganda from both sides, using Katniss and manipulating her as propaganda pieces to sort of incite revolution, and the Capitol using PETA as sort of a piece of propaganda to try and stop it, and sort of smashing these kind of two things together. The other big question in this one is, will we get PETA back, right? The next one is full-on war. We're now going to the Capitol.
So that kind of bleeds into my next question, which was, so I guess for you, you took this as two separate chapters.
Correct.
Yeah,
I mean, splitting the book for me doesn't work unless you can make sort of two really individual movies that sort of feel satisfying. I mean, this one obviously has the promise of more movie. People know there's another chapter. We promise more movie at the end of this one, but the sort of dramatic questions set up at the beginning of this one, have been answered, so it feels like a fulfilling movie on its own.
Of course, this is the book, when everybody gets to, that's vastly different from the first two, because the first two are about the games. So how did that kind of change your approach to the visual shorthand? Because you had already worked on the second chapter, kind of gotten your, for lack of a better word, your feet wet there, and now you're coming back, you're more comfortable. So what was it that you really kind of took a second look at and how you were going to make this in the visual shorthand very different?
Well, I mean, I think that's all comes really from the source material. This was exciting for me because it was very different. One of the challenges of the last movie for me was that it was very similar to the first structurally. There was a reaping, you go to the Capitol, you go to training, you've got the chariots, you've got all these things you saw in the first movie, and it was a challenge to make sure that it feels absolutely different than the first time around. This time, it's brand new material, right? So we're really moving forward. We're going and living in a new place, District 13, right? She's really discovering that she's a part of this revolution. Really, she's starting to join the revolution. We're dealing with new thematic material. So, I was coming from a very, very different place, and that was really exciting for me.
For just the last question, kind of taking off to a second subject, I don't think you get enough credit for how much you've affected kind of the industry, and now we're into this era where their superhero movies are a huge thing. And of course, you made Constantine almost 10 years ago now, and I don't think you get enough credit for how much that kind of influenced things, from the button scenes at the end to kind of infusing more of a kind of cinematic quality to telling these stories, these pulpy stories. Do you still have love for that genre after that experience? Would you ever kind of return to it now that it's kind of a very big thing?
I don't know. I have mixed feelings. I mean, there's definitely some sort of comic book movies that come out that I think that are amazing. There's definitely a lot of comic book movies that come out that are not. I do think that the world is a bit saturated. I saw some chart about all the comic book movies that are sort of projected out to 2019 or 2020 or something. It was like 50 of them or something,
40 in 6 years, we put that up, yeah.
Yeah, okay, that was you guys? Okay, yeah. I mean, that's a little beyond saturation point for my taste. And so that's a tricky one for me, but the truth is I'm kind of all about story. So if suddenly there was this amazing story and an amazing character and it was dealing with some relevant themes, sure, I'd get involved again.